Welcome to our fourth and final module, Interrogating Shadows of the Past. This module consists of 4 different contributions discussing the use of art as a digital tool in working with memory and difficult history. I'm happy to introduce the documentary filmmakers Kell O'Neill and Eline Jongsma discussing their work, His Name is My Name.
This is the story of a man named Gerrit Jongsma. He was a member of the Dutch SS and a Jew hunter whose signature damned at least one family to their deaths. And he was also my great-grandfather. But until recently, I had never even heard his name.
Okay, everyone, I just want you all to take a minute. In general, when you have one of these presentations, people tell you turn off your phones, put it on airplane. We would actually like you to do exactly the opposite. We want you to go immediately to Instagram, and we want you to go to His Name, My Name. You can subscribe. It doesn't really matter to us as much as long as you take some time to look at this project, because we can talk about the project as much as we want, but to us, the work speaks for itself. And we would much rather have people watch the work, take away their own opinions, rather than just listen to us. But since you're here, we might as well talk for 30 minutes about how it was made, why it was made, and what we discovered while we made it. Once again, that's Instagram, His Name, My Name.
I'll start with introducing the two of us. We are known as Jongsma O'Neill, Kell O'Neill, Eline Jongsma. We've been a creative duo for about 15 years. We work in immersive media, have from the start. We make interactive documentaries, VR, AR. Basically, any new technology we like to try out. We like to try out if it's good for storytelling.
Yes, I like to hear it. No, that's good. This is the story of a man named Gerrit Jongsma, and we will get to that soon.
So a lot of our work is about how history reverberates in the present, how history impacts the present. A previous project that we've done is called Empire. It was a documentary that took us 4 years. We shot in 10 different countries, and it was about how Dutch colonialism is still seen in communities around the world. The impact of Dutch colonialism is still seen around the world. Today we're talking about His Name is My Name, which is a story about how a hidden ancestor of mine is still impacting my family today and many people like me. I think that even though this is a personal story, which is something that is quite new for me and Kell, we've never turned the camera on ourselves or the animation in this case. I think it's a story that is very relevant right now. Generation of people who have survived World War II is dying. It makes it possible for people to talk about things that happened in the war. In this case, what happened in the Netherlands during World War II.
Okay, so His Name is My Name is part of the Houses of Darkness project. We were approached in 2021 about making a project in collaboration with Westerbork, which is now a memorial in the Netherlands, in Assen, which coincidentally is where Alina grew up. And when they approached us, they told us that they wanted us to look potentially at doing something about perpetrator perspectives, which led to this extreme period of research where we were looking very, very deep into this story of a man named Gerrit Jongsma. That's Alina's great-grandfather. He was a Nazi-aligned mayor during World War II. He was a pretty terrible guy, all in all, somewhere between a despot and a petty criminal.
And we had known about his existence through my father, who a few years ago just casually during dinner told me about his existence. And we had never really, I mean, it was sort of, because we are documentary filmmakers, of course, we were like thinking, is this a story? Is this like researching this person? Is that something that's interesting to us? We just had not found the right project to engage this material with. So when House of Darkness came around and we were asked to submit a proposal, we considered the story of my great-grandfather as, you know, the sort of basis of creating a story around the subject of perpetratorship.
Yeah, and the goal of telling the story was basically to illuminate a dark corner in history that was not talked about in the Netherlands. And we're not just talking about the history of Gerrit Jongsma. We're talking about basically the history of any collaborator in the Netherlands, because at this stage, the National Archive in the Netherlands keeps files about perpetrators separate from other files about World War II. They can only be accessed through a kind of intense application process. And as a consequence, they're kept in the dark. It's inaccessible history, literally, although this is going to change.
But because the crimes of my ancestor were so significant, there were actually a lot of files available to us. We could just not, we couldn't take them with us. Like we said, this was a hidden ancestor. He was convicted after World War II for his crimes, and the family decided to basically bury him. He died in 1960, so he did not grow very old anyway, but by that time he was completely written out of the family, you know, family albums. So the files are sort of hidden in the National Archive of the Netherlands, but also in my family he was completely hidden. As far as his crimes go, I'll give you a little glimpse. He was a mayor who stole money. He was very active in finding people who were in hiding and handing them over to the police. He was very active in finding people who went on strike to resist the war, who were later shot. He probably, if he had been convicted in 1946, as opposed to 1948 when they eventually got to his case, he probably would have been sentenced to death. He wasn't. He got almost 20 years in jail, which was a lot for that. Even that time, it was a lot, because there were so many people who actually collaborated on many levels with the Nazis who occupied the Netherlands. And this is something, it's still very sensitive topic for people today.
So once we knew that we wanted to use Gerrit as our jumping off point, we made some quick decisions creatively. The first one was that we knew that we wanted to deviate from the standard or a standard kind of Holocaust film aesthetic. We called it black and white and violins. That was something that we just were not going to touch. But we also wanted to find a way to refract the story in such a way that we weren't just telling the story of a man who did terrible things, because in an odd way, the same way that if you show industrial devastation, there's something kind of aesthetically interesting about it, always. It's very hard to convince people that, environmental degradation is terrible if you show them these like really beautiful images of, high industry or low industry. So we basically knew that we had to refract his story somewhat, and specifically refract his story through a contemporary person, a contemporary point of view. And we knew that we wanted to present a female perspective. So very quickly it became clear that, you know, the only way to tell this story was to tell it through Alina.
And when we were looking at this history, we're looking at the archives and looking at my own experiences in my childhood, wanting to tell the story of this perpetrator through my perspective, we realized there was so much information missing about this man, about the visuals are missing. So we very much were already on a path of telling this story through some sort of fractured narrative. So to not have one, you know, dominating narrative and like we are presenting you the story and like here put a bow around it and this is nice, but to really showcase in the form of this story that there are gaps, that we're missing information, that we're not dealing with a complete story. So very early on, we were interested in exploring how mycelial network can be an inspiration for how we shape this story. So mycelial network is, you know, under the ground. It sprouts mushrooms. We also thought it was interesting how it's sort of connected to the Holocaust and to the railway system that was used in World War II.
But the real jumping off point, if we're totally honest, is a story from Alina's childhood. That was the first thing that she ever told me about growing up near Westerbork, and which totally blew my mind, which was that when she was a kid, she and her parents would go and forage for mushrooms on the ground of Westerbork. I didn't know at that point that Westerbork was a transit camp and not a death camp. So the immediate association for me was like, wow, okay, so you're literally picking mushrooms out of a place where so many people have died. Of course, once I knew the full story, that just tied it in even more with this mycelial concept, this concept of connections. And looking at the mushrooms as a central image to the project, looking at the mycelial network as the central construction of the project, we started to think that form-wise, you know, what does a mycelial form of storytelling look like? Well, mycelial networks are almost identical in terms of constructions and connections to social networks. So it seemed like from that decision to follow that little thread, we arrived at Instagram as the best outlet for the project.
So even though, you know, the mushroom, it makes an appearance in the work, it's not relevant to the story in any major way. As storytellers, it's nice, it's something to hold on to in the sort of planning stage, research stage, design stage, to think, okay, this story needs to exist in a particular form. Another big reference for us was Alice in Wonderland. The original illustrations, but also later, you know, iterations of this story and movies, because of the maximalist, you know, psychedelic nature of how we see that story, how the story has been told, but also, of course, the loss of innocence. And even, you know, the story says something about like memory and, you know, can you trust your memory? So that, you know, those were some early moments of inspiration for us.
Now, obviously, we're not the only people responsible for this project. In addition to Westerbork and the Houses of Darkness team for empowering us to actually make this work, it is a collaborative piece. We worked with a great animator named Jure Breglitz. We worked with Imagination of Things, a wonderful Amsterdam-based Brazilian-American design team, and also with San Ray, who's a wonderful musician. And the way that at a certain point the project transformed for us was that we gave it to other people in a way. And by that, I don't mean that we just said, hey, go do what you do. We constructed ways to bring collaboration to the table. So the way we thought of it was kind of like a football game. Get people passing, get as many points of connection between the different people who are participating and working on this project. Because the more you're trading, music to the animator, animation drafts to the designers, back to us in the writing draft and the notes and all of that. Like every day, the more these connections that you make, the more unified the vision becomes, because these people are coming together just for this project. They probably will never work together in this configuration again. And so there's a kind of purity to that vision, because it's everybody doing what they do best together, being influenced by the other people on the team. So like there is no other his name is my name. This was a unique moment, a unique collaboration, and really managing that was, in a way, the most important assignment that we had on this, because you have a question of control versus freedom, right? And in a way, that's a director's job, is like, how much control do you take? How much freedom do you give? You constantly have to be sort of pulling on the reins and kind of subtly pushing the team down the field.
So in production, this is also known as agile production, not just in production, in design as well. So the waterfall model of production is sort of traditional model where one station finishes and the next station starts, and you work towards an end product.
Do you guys know about this? It's actually has its origins in software.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say so like that idea of like linearity, especially for a nonlinear project, it has to go out the window, and you have to start working agilely.
Which is, like Kel explained, passing the ball back and forth.
Constant iteration.
Yeah, and being okay with just leaving bad ideas on the table or in the design space.
In terms of who we were targeting, for us it was very, very important that we were looking at a young generation that used their phones or streaming platforms as their primary source of entertainment and information. Because all of this stuff is kind of coming to people equally. It's like what you get from the phone, it could be the New York Times, or it could be someone's opinion or somebody's TikTok dance. Somehow it all kind of washes over you. And we knew that we were adding to that wave. So we had to look for ways to stick out, which also meant choosing a specific color palette that would kind of jump out at people, choosing music that defied expectations, finding a way to actually cut through the noise and get people interested.
Because one of the stories that is woven through these 10 chapters is the rise of, National Socialist movement in the 1930s in the Netherlands. There are a lot of young people nowadays, and I know that this was also an objective of the Houses of Darkness project, don't really know what World War II, what happened in World War II. So we're also dealing with a sort of hidden history. Part of World War II that for an occupied country is a hard, angle to admit regardless, because, nobody wants to talk about collaborators. So you've got that, you've got, young audience not very well informed. So through these chapters, we're also weaving a little history lesson about what actually, factual knowledge about the rise of National Socialist movement into the 1930s, because my ancestor was very active. So that was an easy narrative to weave into the larger story.
And that particularly comes to bear in the augmented reality filter, which is also, I'd say, the last layer of the project. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but Instagram has, at this point, pretty robust augmented reality capabilities. And in the same way that we are inviting people to go to Instagram to find this story, we also wanted to have people have the ability to bring the world of the story into their world. So the augmented reality filter essentially replaces the world around you with the world, the story world of the project. And it's been interesting to see who looks at that because the adoption of the augmented reality filters on Instagram is primarily in Asia. So we have a tremendous number of Indonesian and Indian viewers who don't even necessarily watch the videos, but have experienced the AR filter.
Yeah. All the chapters are fairly short, around 3 minutes each. This is also very deliberate because the point is that you're waiting for the bus and see a chapter, or you're sitting on the toilet and you're reading a chapter. So this is all very intentional in the design, and we're trying to have the form and the content complement each other and make sense.
So His Name is My Name launched in July of 2022 at Westerbork with a mural there, so you can still go there, I think, today. Look at the mural, use the QR code and watch the trailer. But then after that, it started sneaking out into the world in different ways. Westerbork really helped us with promotion. So it kind of found its way into the international media in ways that we didn't expect. First, an article in The Guardian, then an article in Vanity Fair France, then the Politiken in Denmark wrote about it. And obviously a lot of publications in the Netherlands picked up on it. Tablet picked up on it and wrote a very long feature. And that led, I think, to us deciding to apply for film festivals. We had our film festival premiere in November last year at IDFA, the International Documentary Festival Amsterdam, which is essentially the largest documentary festival in the world. It won the Creative Technology Prize there. It became a Webby honoree. Played at Forum des Images in France, in Paris. And it is going to be showing at the Netherlands Film Festival in competition for the Gouden Kalf, which is, funny to say this, the Dutch Oscar. It's sort of like saying the Belgian Grammy. But yeah, it'll be in competition for that prize in September.
Yes, so all of this is to, get the maximum amount of audience. You're putting it online, making it accessible. You're getting the media attention, international. I mean, we've gotten messages from people all over the world wanting to share their stories with us because it's so confessional, and it's, and in that sense, going against the grain of Instagram, which is, of course, not really confessional. It's people telling pretty stories about their lives. So it really appeals to people to go against the grain and to then take the opportunity to talk to us about their family's history. And that's also a reason to, apply to film festivals if you have a project, just to maximize that audience and the legitimacy of your work.
Now, finally, we're not super big believers in impact evaluation because we don't think that there are really metrics to do it. But there are certain metrics at this point that we can point to when we look at how the project has entered the world. Looking only at Instagram, because the project is also available on YouTube and on Vimeo, I believe that the videos overall have had 50,000 views, which is, it's all right. But one thing that's very interesting about that is that it's actually had 2,600 or more than 2,600 points of engagement. So that's shares, likes, comments, which, as ratios go, is quite something. The people who see the project really, really engage with the project. The people who attend to the project really stay with it. And as far as who we were actually reaching, 40% of the audience is between the ages of 18 and 24. Then the largest category is between 25 and 34. And then the third largest category is people 13 to 18, which honestly is what we wanted to do. And most of them, by a really large margin, are women or identify as women. So yeah, I mean, you try not to think about the goals when you're making the work, but it is a lucky thing when those goals are reached. So in a way, I kind of just want to thank all of the partners in the Houses of Darkness project for allowing us to make this project and to, intentionally or not, realize those goals.
Also, I'd like to thank my family for believing in me, allowing me to tell this story. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Next, I'd like to introduce Michael Safarik Brandthwaite, Associate Professor at Staffordshire University, giving a lecture on hybrid objects.
My name is Michael Safarik Brandthwaite. I'm Associate Professor of Fine Art and Director of Visual Art at Staffordshire University. I'm going to talk today about ongoing projects that I'm doing at the moment. They're at various stages of completion. There's some artworks are already complete and other things are ongoing. Each question how we look at the Holocaust, that's something that I'm really interested in. I'm interested in the history, but I'm also interested in how we look at the history, how we frame the history, and how it manifests in the contemporary mindset, or not in some cases. All of the work aims to raise questions, not necessarily give answers. I'm not looking for solutions to the problems that I identify. I'm trying to be quite objective, and I'm trying to move things around to pose conundrums, pose conversations that hopefully continue the debates, and I think that's possibly the most interesting thing an artist can offer, because you're always sort of stirring things up, if you like. And in this presentation, I will attempt to disentangle how the creative process led to new knowledge that developed new perspectives and lines of inquiry that may not have been possible via other methodologies. So I personally believe that artists and our practice in creative practice can go into territories that other disciplines can't. I work a lot with the Centre of Genocide and Archaeology at Staffordshire University. And quite often my role and my projects is always these things that are quite difficult. Maybe an established narrative is challenged by some new scientific information. And how do we kind of get that into the public sphere without it being really dry and scientific? You can use the creative process, the artistic art, the artworks. You can use the creative process and artworks to pose questions that develop into bigger discussions. So the context for the project, or the research, if you like, is that the projects bring together imagery in what might seem at first disparate or maybe even controversial in its structure, exploring what I term looking at the Holocaust. I was drawn to the continual quest for balance that the sites need to address in order to firstly educate about the dark and traumatic past, but also to attract visitors, resulting in an experience of some sort. This experience needs to both appeal to attract attention whilst not shying away from the unquestionable suffering that is presented at these sites. In order to achieve this, I paid attention to the actions and interactions as well as the structure of experience, including my own at each location. And as Cole notes, Auschwitz land, where tourists have become the ultimate rubberneckers, passing by and gazing at somebody else's tragedy. So as the Holocaust slips out of lived memory, we may be at a point where practice-based research in the creative arts are a key element in finding new ways, finding new and engaging forms as a new landscape of experience is constructed around the concept of doing Auschwitz. So the first project I took on originated in 2020 and was cut short in a way by COVID. However, in discussion with Falstad, decided to do it as an online residency. The aim at that time was the fact that museums around Europe were closed due to the COVID pandemic, so how could we continue the discussion about the Holocaust and about these sites, but also being aware of a lot of the more conspiratorial ideas about COVID that were emerging, and then it became very pressing to continue these discussions about difficult matters in society. So I was accessing this site here via the internet. Ingeborg was giving me weekly tutorials, discussions. I was accessing the online archive. So it became about building bridges between myself and the UK in a terraced house on the edge of Manchester and this site here in mid-Norway. And what that means, it actually turned into a really fruitful experience. And even though maybe the work that was produced, that went on the website and some of it's now physical, didn't tackle everything, I think the questions that it raised became really interesting and actually quite core things in my work as I move forward. So the first work I'm going to talk about is Petar Krasula's journey. He was a Yugo-Serbian prisoner in Norway. First thing that attracted me was the distance between the southern and northern edge of Europe. You know, bearing in mind that my nationality is British, the United Kingdom, and we've recently, by democratic decision, left the EU. It was really interesting that I was working with this idea of former Yugoslavia, Serbia. At that point, Croatia wasn't in the EU, but it is now, so that's kind of a southern border, and then Norway is one of the most northern cities. So it was quite interesting that this whole concept of Europe covered this Petard's journey. I then became interested in the fact that I couldn't physically do the journey, and I know another artist, filmmaker has remade the journey. So I started thinking, okay, well, the interface I have to use here is the internet, and the internet has various structures and algorithms that cater to our needs, apparently. So I would use that to see what his journey would look like if I just used Google searches, put in the names of the places or descriptions of places, and see what comes of it. So you end up with a kind of almost internet-controlled journey, and it's tied together with quotes, which is taken from Nilsson and Ritan, I hope I've got that right, book about the Nazi camp system in Norway. So I'm interested in who owns the images and how they would react if they knew their images were being used to tell this story. So this is part of the project that's still ongoing, which has gone through all the URLs that I downloaded the images from, and get in touch with the owners of the images and saying, I'm producing this artwork. It's about a prisoner's journey from the southern tip of Europe to the northern tip of Europe, and your images came up on an internet search. Is it okay if I use it for this artwork? What I'm proposing to do at the moment is, if somebody disagrees, I will just leave that space blank, but the blank itself, I hope, will be an absence, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later. And yeah, so I think this is a really interesting way in reaching out quite rhizomically and encountering people and these stories away from a site, but connected to a site, obviously, and seeing what they bring together. So geographically and historically disparate, the work forces the viewer to reassemble the journey in an arena not bound by narration or time. So these were photographs printed on aluminium diabond, and the four images you see there are the first searches for Belgrade, Banjaca, and the river trip on the Danube, Vienna, and that puts together to go with the words under there, which is, after 2 months of captivity in the Banjaca concentration camp, and Belgrade, Krskula was sent by riverboat to Vienna. So it connects the key points in that bit of text with the images above, and then this mapped out the journey with the same method being applied. Until he eventually arrives here at actually no, he went to Korgen first, and then came back down to Skogen train station, and then to this camp. So moving on to the on-site residency, because I'd had plenty of time to consider this, these are some of the key questions that I wanted to address or tackle. So what is the visitor experience like, not only in its wider context, but more explicitly, how have ethical concerns been balanced with basic human needs, so toilets, food, water, and how do all these things kind of coexist with history, with trauma, and yeah, they kind of seem uncomfortable, but they have to exist together. So I'm really interested in how we tackle that. Yeah, what was it like to engage with this? At what point is having a good time inappropriate? You know, we've all been here, we've all had a nice time here, and to a certain extent, but when is it appropriate or inappropriate? And how could creative and visual work create a starting point for present and future engagement with sites? What do you bring and what do you take away? So the site as a reality and also the site as a concept. And how do we draw attention to what a visitor does and how they might position themselves in the context of the sites as a presumably willing participant in a contemporary experience. And what are the results of an indexical approach that connects the present experience with past events? So the first thing I'd done was to have a look at the Falstad website, which I was aware of, but I went back and looked at it in a different way. And what you see on this slide here are two of the experiences you can have at Falstad from the website, and obviously they look nothing like the kind of discussions we've been having today. So I was really interested, not in a critical kind of way, but kind of an objective way of how do you sort of function and operate and be this contemporary site to get engagement, to get people to come here and enjoy their experience, get something from their experience, contemplate and reflect, etc. This is the accommodation. This was my room during the residency. And so I came with a completely blank canvas and just started going out into the woods, into the surrounding areas, and photographing and filming and basically just allowing things to emerge. So the first work that came from that, I will press play on the video in a second, was this work, which is called The Water Flows. It comes from Des Filman, down by the commander's house on the path that leads to the woods using a drone. And during that time, it was April, it was very cold. I got back to the room, I was muddy. I was cold, and I was really relieved to have a shower, and there was just something really jarring happened when I suddenly had access to all this water in the shower, this warm water, this very pleasant experience, and how these two things come together. So the river on the right is actually the river that Petar Krasula and an accomplice went down. They went down the river when they escaped because it wouldn't leave any footprints. It was cold, it was horrible. You might be glad to know they did eventually get to Sweden, where it became more relatively safe. And then my own experience of this very warm, clinical and nice bathroom. So I wanted to bring those two things into close proximity, those two different bodies of water, if you like, and how they were very different in time, in scale and in experience, and to kind of capture where a modern visitor might interact or perceive the site of Falstad in this case. The next work I made was titled 3 minutes 24, and this work is based on the burial markers in the forest itself. I used a car to drive from the site of Falstad to the execution site in the forest. And it took me 3 minutes 24, and I know from talking to the staff, very knowledgeable staff at Falstad, that they sometimes use trucks to take the prisoners there to murder them. So all these grave markers are photographed using a neutral density filter, which means that the time of the photograph being constructed in the camera is 3 minutes 24. So what you see when you look at one of those markers is that time pressed into a visual image. And they also used to sometimes march the prisoners down there. So this is a slightly different work. The photograph here is constructed over 10 minutes and 51 seconds. So even though you need to know that title to understand the work, which is roughly the time it takes to walk to the execution site. So in that image, which is just of the exit, heading towards the forest where the prisoners were murdered, and this, that's all kind of compressed in there. And I was just really interested in getting that whole moment, if you like, of leaving the camp, maybe knowing what was going to happen, and condensing it into the structure or the fabric of a photograph in its own right. During the on-site residency, I used the commander's house as a base, and Within that, I used a process called photogrammetry to scan a lot of the normal mundane items, if you like, the domestic items that would make the place comfortable, that would make the place seem like home. And in the process of scanning, various holes emerged in the scans, and this was because the objects were reflective. But I found something really interesting in that that void is then a place for you to conceptually think about that moment. That commander having a meal, his friends being there, them enjoying that experience, surrounded by all these other things. So this electronic glitch, in a way, to me at least, became a very poetic moment. A moment where something could be inserted within the object to alter its narrative. At the moment, there are 3D prints, but they will be turned into ceramics very soon. And we did a bit of research. They were made by KPM, so if anybody's interested, that translates as Royal Porcelain Manufacturer, and they are still active in Berlin now. So if you Google that, you will find a very nice website. Making very nice porcelain, as they did then, but to supply a machine that was trying to do something else. I'm just going to read this quote from Mark Twain here. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster, and more importantly, when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. And that was my theory or concept when making these objects. So all of these will be reproduced in ceramics, and they will be placed back into the commander's house on the table, and a whole dinner set will be created with these glitches and abstractions and various kind of nuances that disrupt the object and its history. Now I'm going to move into two other projects that I'm working on. Just to give you an idea of the breadth of some of the work I do and the material that I work with, and the range of approaches that can be taken when artists collaborate with other disciplines. So this work is called Supply Request. It's at Unicube Gallery at Staffordshire University, and it's also been in Stockport War Memorial Art Gallery. So between June 19th of June to the 7th of July 1942, the Cab Commander of Treblinka wrote letters to the chairman of the Warschau Ghetto asking for supplies. This exhibition deconstructs the letters and uses surrogate items to illustrate how mundane objects became part of the apparatus of mass murder. In comparison, it also presents some of the items excavated during an archaeological investigations at Treblinka, bringing the found and the unfound into close proximity and interrogating how we ascertain truths through the museum experience. The objects force us to confront the choices made by the perpetrators, the bystanders and the victims who encountered Treblinka. Artworks introduce visitors to notions of material culture, perpetrators and the afterlives as Holocaust sites. Although the presentation of these mundane items is relatively simple, the work is grounded in deeper theoretical concerns regarding the lives and the actions of the perpetrators. The viewer is forced to engage with the difficult notion that these men could be concerned with trivial material items, including shower components, construction materials, and perhaps most remarkable wallpaper samples, whilst constructing one of the largest killing sites in the world. Also demonstrates elements of the social life they enjoyed in the camp through the discovered objects. As highlighted by Kanda, one of the most contentious problems in post-Holocaust artistic and literary production has been the ethical implications of representing acts of radical human evil, or more specifically, the inhumanity of the Nazi other. By addressing this ordinary activity, we make connections between our own lives. This work reminds us that, as comfortable as it is, everyone involved in the Holocaust was human. And whilst debate continues over where blame and guilt lie, the reality is that as people we are as close to the perpetrators as we are to the victims. And this here is the letter from Ebel asking for the materials during the early stages of the Treblinka extermination camp. And you'll see things there like samples of wallpaper, like rulers, like the order for some pencils. Which all sound fairly mundane, normal, everyday items that you might have in your own shed, your own garage. However, in this context, they are orchestrated and used to provide the means for mass executions and killings. So on the left there, you see a rail spike. Again, a rail spike, it's a very practical item. However, it was used to build the branch line, which would go off to Treblinka. And there's some machine screws there, not 100% certain what they were used for, but they were clearly used for something at Treblinka. And on the right, you've got a ruler, you've got some carpenter's pencils. The first gas chambers at Treblinka were made out of wood, so it's likely that they were used for that. And an ignition switch. Again, it doesn't seem that dangerous to start with, but when you understand that the killing method at Treblinka was the use of a Soviet tank engine and death through carbon monoxide, then actually that switch becomes something far more sinister, and you start realizing that this thing that you just bought online because it fitted this exhibition is actually something that is a surrogate facilitated the construction and successful operation of one of the most deadly Reinhard camps. Here is the exhibition itself. During the exhibition, we printed off multiples of the items so that the visitors could encounter the amount of items that had been ordered. And we also allowed the visitors to walk on these prints and intend to use these prints that are on the floor again and again in the next exhibition, so that they gradually deteriorate, and this almost secondary archaeological evidential experience begins as these break down, and the following visitors or audiences contribute but also see the past kind of happening in front of them. The last exhibition I'll talk about is an exhibition that's coming up in the summer of 2023 at the Memory of Cast Westerbork. Exhibition title is Everything Will Be Okay in the Morning. So Westerbork was a transit camp in the Netherlands. And I've been invited, the assignment if you like, is to approach Camp Westerbork as a site of memory. And one of the things that I became most interested in is the many different uses of the camp and the history of the camp as a whole, as well as including obviously the Holocaust, which is the most kind of significant and traumatic element in its history. So the work addresses this through challenging the Sacrosanct Museum with neon signage as the epitome of commercialisation and kitsch culture that is then pulled back into historic discourse via computer control and material culture from the archives. The signage will switch on and off for a set amount of time relative to the time that is calculated for each group's time spent in the camp. It is both provocation and a mediation of historical fact and worn experience. Coffee will also be offered in the space, reflecting on the needs versus experience of visitors and pressures on memorial sites to be cultural or heritage options, alongside providing education on a vital and traumatic past that still has implications in our contemporary society. What you're looking at on the screen now is the working out of the neon signs and what they will say, alongside the items, the different groups, the notes that I've made with the historian and archivist at Camp Westerbork, and then translating that into the Dutch language. And this is a mock-up of what the exhibition will look like, and these neon lights will illuminate and go off to the relative amount of time that each of the different groups throughout the history of the camp were present in it. So the reflections on my experiences. Memorial Human Rights Centres and museums have chosen to engage with practice-based artistic research. Why? Are there problems that can be said in other forms due to the wider range in ethical, moral and sensitivity concerns? Other disciplines are interested in the potential to reach new audiences and diversify engagement and dissemination. Why? Practice-based research is not an answer or a definitive solution, but by working methodologically, that allows continuous reflection, evaluation and direction change. How do we understand practice-based in this context? Artistic research based on and in response to other stimuli provides new outputs that are not defined at inception but emerge from wider-ranging experimental approaches, thus allowing more problematic discourses to be explored. In contrast, a commission may set out a far clearer objective. Practice-based research in this context can offer outputs such as seminars, papers and conferences, broadening and creating new knowledge and linking up artists and researchers across different areas. Some of the directions that I'm interested in moving to in the future is perpetrator spaces. I'm doing a lot of research on that now, the lives of perpetrators, and the problem with the profane and the mundane and how we represent that and tackle that in a contemporary setting. The creation of sonic and visual encounters, indexical placing to build portals to overlooked and sidelined or even hiding in plain sight elements of the Holocaust, and the pastoral backdrop to the Holocaust and other genocidal crimes, using cropping and editing, the manipulation and control of lens-based media to control and tell stories. This comes from some of the images from the independent state of Croatia, where there's one photograph used in 3 different contexts for 3 different reasons. So I'm interested in how that things can be mechanized, culture can be mechanized to serve the purposes of different motives in individuals. And I'm going to finish with, it's actually a quote from Eichmann, but it's from a Westermann text, and he adds to that. So Eichmann recalled, a friendly get-together, we sang a song, we drank, we climbed up on a chair and drank again, and then onto the table and down again, and so on, a type of merrymaking I had not known, and then to Westermann. This picture of 2 key agendas of genocide, drinking, singing, and celebrating their role in planning mass murder from a tabletop, provides a vivid image of the one way in which these architects of annihilation rejoiced in their accomplishments.
Next, I'm happy to introduce Associate Professor Steffi D. Young at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and her lecture on post-memory and digital campscapes.
After everybody almost has been talking about what they have been doing, I'm talking about something I've been analyzing. So I've not been involved in any of the projects that I'm presenting here. I'm a researcher and I look at this stuff from a meta perspective. And I want to start with a video. Okay, so what you have seen is a scene from the VR experience Witness Auschwitz. Witness Auschwitz, I don't know how many of you already know the project, some might already have seen this. So this was presented in 2017 at the Gamescom in Cologne, Germany, which is the biggest games fair in the world. And it immediately started controversy. So the organization committee of Gamescom requested that the scene be removed from a film presenting the Italian exhibitors. Online articles started writing about it and asked whether VR was the appropriate medium for such grave a topic as Auschwitz. Does a VR simulation of Auschwitz cross an ethical line? One author asked, while another one wondered whether the simulation represented a banalization of the Holocaust. The Memorial and Museum Auschwitz-Birkenau tweeted, using VR to let people experience Auschwitz, in quotation marks, crosses an ethical red line. A person should not be manipulated in feeling what victims felt. Ironically, only 2 years later, the Polish Real Invented Studios published the first pictures of a VR experience of Auschwitz-Birkenau that they developed for the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. Until this day, Witness Auschwitz remains an unfinished project, as the developers have so far failed to procure the necessary funding to complete it. However, there are 6 similar experiences that have been developed or are in development right at the moment. I'll come back to those during my presentation. And those experiences stand, in my opinion, at the beginning of a development that will probably considerably change the way in which we remember the past in general and the Holocaust in particular. What I argue is that those VR experiences herald what I call a digital, corporeal, and affective phase of Holocaust memory. In this phase, immersive technologies like VR induce the users of the memorial medium to physically and emotionally feel present in a past reality by either being plunged into a digital reconstruction of a historical space or even by taking on the body of a historical person. Although VR is a relatively new medium, the experiences are, of course, not developed in a vacuum. What I want to talk about here is how different memorial discourses and memorial media converge with the experiences. I'll thereby particularly pay attention to the aesthetics that are so far used in those experiences. I will thereby look at, first, the idea of VR as an empathy machine and its implementation in the VR experiences. Secondly, the representation of human figures. Thirdly, the photos and photorealism and hyperrealism. Fourthly, the use of so-called iconic supersigns. And finally, the response to the so-called Bilderverbot. So let's start with VR as an empathy machine. As we have seen above, Witness Auschwitz is being criticized for crossing an ethical red line, for promising that users will be able to experience Auschwitz. What is referred to here is what VR developers generally call immersion and presence. So presence in the VR describes, and I cite here VR pioneers Mel Slade and Sylvia Wilbur, a state of consciousness, the physical sense of being in the virtual environment. Developers try to induce this state of presence, this state of consciousness, through immersive technologies and techniques such as the 360-degree image generated by the head-mounted display, which might be complemented by a controller, a cave, or a haptic bodysuit. Ironically, while critics see presence as the reason why VR should not be used for the purpose of Holocaust memory, the developers of the VR experiences in question use presence as an argument for why VR in particular is the right medium for Holocaust memory. Thus, Daniele Azzara, who is the creative director of Witness Auschwitz, the VR experience that we have just seen, says, witnesses from Auschwitz are disappearing because of their age. Books are not enough, movies are not enough, we have to be there, and with VR we can be. So Azzara's argument is kind of like, with the right gear, everybody can become a witness of Auschwitz. And, that is the promise, thereby better understand the past and ultimately become a better, more empathetic person. This idea is one that harks back to the idea of VR as, quote, the ultimate empathy machine. That was first used by this guy, who's Chris Milk, a film director, and he used it in a TED Talk in 2015. Now, what is empathy? There are numerous possible definitions of empathy, and if you look at the history of the concept and the history of empathy, it's very complex. I'm here trying to make it a bit simpler by using Daniel Bateson's, a social psychologist Daniel Bateson's, two questions that he thinks we ask when we talk about empathy. So he says we can either ask, how can one know what another person is thinking and feeling? Or the other question, what leads one person to respond with sensitivity and care to the suffering of another? Chris Milk, in his with his concept of the empathy machine, tries especially to give an answer to the second question. So what leads one person to respond with sensitivity and care to the suffering of another? Milk is one of the producers of Clouds Over Sidra, which is a 360-degree film developed in collaboration with the United Nations. And it takes viewers to Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan, where they follow around 12-year-old Sidra, a Syrian refugee. While in Clouds Over Sidra, the users become outside observers, VR has also been used to literally make users walk into somebody else's shoes, and that's a phrase you find quite a lot when people talk about VR. And it's very often somebody who is less unfortunate than you. And thereby giving an answer to the first question, how can one know what another person is thinking and feeling? So here we see, for example, a project where people were put into the body of a person of a different ways than theirs, and were also experiencing racial discrimination. What VR developers here make use of is, on the one hand, virtual body ownership. That's the brain's propensity to accept illusions of additional limbs, body distortions, and so on, as well as the so-called Proteus effect, which is the mind's propensity to act according to their avatar's physical properties. So there have been studies that have shown that users with a more attractive avatar tend to be more intimate with other participants in the simulation, and participants with a taller avatar are more confident in negotiation tasks. Generally speaking, the VR experiences of concentration camps that I've been looking at, and which are also the ones that exist at the moment, can be subdivided into two categories: those that, like clouds over Sidra, put the visitor into the position of an outside observer, and those that, for the duration of the VR experiences, also give them the persona of an inmate of the camp. So you can become a victim of the Holocaust yourself. Avatars are here not used, but a first-person perspective that turns the user into a witness. In what follows, I will especially look at the aesthetical means that are used in order to make the users either feel present in the historical space or even be this historical person. So the first thing I'm looking at is photo and hyperrealism. An example of a VR experience that merely take the users to the historical space of the camp, at least that's what I've gathered from the information I got so far from Auschwitz VR, where I have to say that those were the only developers that didn't want to talk to me. So all of the information I gathered is from their online presence. So that's being developed at the moment by the Really Invented Studios for the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. And the project is not finished yet, and it's still difficult to get information. They are launching it within the next weeks, so then we'll see what it actually looks like. So according to the information that I could procure, the experience should mainly consist of a very meticulous reconstruction of Auschwitz-Birkenau, to which the user can move and occasionally consult documents and testimonies. There are also supposed to be education scenarios that seem to work like short virtual reality films, but it looks like you're not interacting in those films, but I don't know about that. In order to give the users a feeling of presence, the producers of the VR experiences have opted for a photorealist representation. That actually counts for all of the experiences I've been looking at. Especially the producers of Auschwitz VR put, so it seems, a lot of effort into representing the camp as realistically as possible. They have photoscanned existing buildings in 3D, recreated over 100 objects, and did a lot of archival research. What I find quite remarkable, for example, is that they even try to reconstruct the flora in Auschwitz-Birkenau, so like where trees were, which is something like often, even if we go to a concentration camp sites today, we often don't think about like what plants were actually there and where the trees, was there something. The camp often looks very bare, right? And that's not the way it looked in the past. The attempt to accurately reconstruct the space has also got its challenges, though, and that becomes apparent with the reconstruction of the SS vehicles. On their website, the producers write, "One of the most difficult and demanding processes was the reconstruction of the SS fleet. The few photos showed only fragments of the images of the vehicles. There's no original technical documentation and no information on Nazi modifications to the vehicles used in the camps." Here one problem, this garbage cams is actually something that's on the website, and I don't know what that means. That's a quotation from the website. I guess it's an error in the Polish translation. So one problem, yeah, it's a very cynical one. So one problem with the approach becomes obvious here. Not in every case are we completely sure what the camp or the objects therein looked like. There are only very few photographs that were taken during the time that the camps were working, and which is the time that is generally represented in the VR experiences, and only very few original barracks survived. Although we know that the barracks were more or less identical, they were of course not fully identical. So the photorealism of the reconstruction covers up a gap in knowledge. It suggests a security about the past that we just don't have. Nevertheless, photorealism is at the moment the aesthetic of choice for all of the VR experiences, taking users back to former concentration camps. However, photorealism that tries to represent something more than a photograph is not photorealism anymore. Art historians here talk about hyperrealism. In fact, the VR experiences show the camps in a state that they have never been in, functioning but without inmates, and mostly also without material traces left by those inmates. At least in those models that do give the persona of an inmate, users of the that do not give the users the persona of an inmate. Users of the model become principally witnesses of an empty crime scene. They could be compared to the very first witnesses entering the camps after liberation, if those first witnesses had ever seen the camps completely empty and meticulously cleaned, that is, and if Sobibor had ever been liberated. Unlike in Auschwitz VR, additional information is not always offered. So in virtual Sobibor, for example, you just you're kind of pushed through the camp, but like we also have to keep in mind that this is still a prototype and it's not in use at the moment. But the way it is at the moment is that you're just walking through the camp and you don't get any additional information. So in this way, the models kind of might reproduce a problem inherent in unguided visits to concentration camp sites. Users, while seeing the original buildings, will not necessarily understand their original purposes. I want here to give an example of one project that kind of tries to do that, in my opinion, that tries to show this to make apparent this gap in knowledge, which is the augmented, not virtual, augmented reality model of Bergen-Belsen. The buildings are here. On the top you see kind of the first model of this. So the buildings are here very abstract and kept in a light grey hue. In the first version, which is the one you see in the top, there were no windows and doors shown because their exact placement was uncertain at the time. In fact, the producers had started from a photorealist version, but had then opted for a more abstract model, as they wanted to, I quote, avoid the invocation of an immersive experience based on speculation. Since its first model, the model of Bergen-Belsen has become more and more detailed. The more information about the actual layout and the look of the camp was discovered. So you see the current model on the bottom, which is not in use though at the moment. And it shows, apart from windows and doors, also the placement of trees, for example, like the VR model of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Nevertheless, the model remains abstract and thereby, unlike the VR models, acts on a postmodern idea of historiography, according to which the past cannot be reconstructed. Let's now move to the next point, superscience. Another means, so that's a means used by all VR experiences in order to make users feel present in the past reality. Iconic superscience of the Holocaust. Thus, in Witness Auschwitz, the entrance gate to Auschwitz-Birkenau is very prominent in the introductory scene, as you have seen. It is, of course, inspired by the picture of the entrance gate to Auschwitz-Birkenau taken by Polish photographer Stanisław Mucha in 1945, which you see next to it. On the right, I guess, from you? No, on the left. I'm very bad with this. And it's A still from the experience on the website shows a wet shoe lying on the railway tracks before the gate. Now, with the color wet on kind of black and white with violins, as we had before, is of course it has become a symbol of the Holocaust since the scene with the girl in the wet dress in Schindler's List. So much that wet shoes are now prominently placed on the piles of shoes that you can see in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The video, They Were Just Like Us, produced by the Memorial on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the liberation, shows in the first scene a woman dancing in wet shoes that in the last scene can be seen lying on such a pile of shoes. And in Virtual Sobibor, the user finds such a pile of shoes next to a pile of clothes in a boxcar. Other visual super signs are suitcases, the train journey to the camps, the barracks with the bunk beds, the crematoria, the showers, and orally, the barking of dogs and the guards' harsh commands in German. Most of the VR experiences further take users to Auschwitz-Birkenau, thus a camp that most of them will already have heard of, and which will immediately bring to their mind pictures that they have seen in other media representations before. And Auschwitz-Birkenau is kind of a super sign in itself of the Holocaust. By remediating those super signs, producers appeal to the user's image memory. Users, when entering the experiences, find more or less what they are expecting, which in turn will probably heighten their sense of presence in the past reality. And we now move to the third point, generic life stories. So there's three VR experiences that try to put you into the position of an inmate. I'll here use Witness Auschwitz as an example. So on the slide you can see the storyline that is planned at the moment, not realized. So after a prologue, the user first takes part in the, I quote, everyday life of a European Jewish family right before the racist laws. Before, one night, the door opens and the Nazi soldiers with their flashlights break in. They are then taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau by train, where they are separated from their child at the selection, see a man collapsing during a roll call, experience the evening in an overcrowded barrack, and even dig a mass grave near a crematorium tree. They are finally liberated by Red Army soldiers talking in a strong accent. Don't know what accent. Not only is the exact national background of the protagonist thus left unclear, they also seem to change gender several times, moving back and forth from experiences that mostly women would have made, such as preparing dinner or being separated from their child at selection, to more male experiences, such as digging the mass grave or working in a lutist shop. The stories that are told in Witness Auschwitz and in the other VR experiences are thus extremely simplified versions of what a victim might have gone through. What the developers present to users is, however, not the memory of one specific witness, but a very generic and abstract idea of the fate of victims of the Holocaust in general. By this, they don't consider the complexities of victims' biographies and the different experiences that they would have made depending on where they came from, what camps they were sent to, what position in the camp they had because of their class, race, gender, and the reasons for persecution. Such an idea of a generic story that can stand in for all also comes to the fore of the representation of human figures. For Witness Auschwitz, the plan is to make both the guards and the prisoners' face and character less. The abstract figures are here to represent a dehumanization of the prisoners in the camp. Unfortunately, we don't have examples of the victims yet, but you can see a representation of the SS guards in the picture on the left. A VR experience that, unlike Witness Auschwitz, has been finished is Journey Through the Camps, developed for the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Also in this experience, only shadows can be seen. The developers explain that they used shadows rather than realistic representations because, so far, it is still challenging to realistically represent human figures in VR. And it is representations of... So in Auschwitz, the abstraction of the figures is further to represent the dehumanization of the victims in the camp. Now, one problem with this is, although it's kind of understandable, that by this you not only represent it, but you also reproduce it. A generalization of the fate of victims and their representation as shadows or characterless figures means downplaying the efforts that were made during what Annette Vivioka has called the era of the witness, so during the last decades, where we basically tried to give each victim a name and a face and to tell individual stories, right? To what I think is my final point, the Bilderverbot. So while offering a hyper-real reconstruction of the camps, representing well-known images and generic life stories, the VR experiences do not show everything that was part of the daily workings of the camp. At the latest, since Adorno's observation that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric was interpreted as a dictum, any representation of the Holocaust oscillates between what Bettina Banasch and Almut Hammer have called the Gebot der Erinnerung, thus the precept that the events need to be remembered, and the Verbot der Bilder, thus the idea that the events of the Holocaust cannot and should not be represented, which is also the topic of what we've been talking about for the last 2 days, right? In the VR experiences, this oscillation can be seen in the experience's avoidance to represent violence, and often also in the avoidance to represent human figures, apart from the examples I've shown you so far. So, citing Daniele Zara again, the creative director of Witness Auschwitz, he says, if you think of Auschwitz normally, you think about horrible, terrible things which did happen. But we felt these were less important to show in VR, as you already know that from the movies. What Witness Auschwitz would show, Zara argues, is the everyday life of people in the camp. However, what can be considered every day in the camp? Wasn't violence a crucial part of the everyday in Auschwitz? The extent of the Bilderverbot can and is, of course, constantly negotiated and tested. The greatest taboo is certainly still the representation of death in the gas chambers. A taboo that some critics argue Steven Spielberg has broken with the infamous shower scene in Schindler's List. Most of the VR experiences avoid representing the gas chambers, thus in virtual Sobibor, the users can enter the barracks and train carriages, while they will only get to the entrance of the gas chambers, where their walk ends. In Witness Auschwitz, the gas chambers are alluded to when the user is asked to dig a mass grave, but distant cries are covered by the loud sound of a motorcycle. Journey through the camps creates, possibly unintentionally, a Schindler's List effect. The user is taken into a shower room, and for a split second it is not clear whether water or gas will come out of the shower heads. It's water, of course. What is deemed to be acceptable or what is not only a question of what is represented, but also of the medium that is used for this representation. One of the reasons for not showing violence is certainly also the will to differentiate the simulations from computer games. However, the danger of an underrepresentation of violence might be that it could potentially lead users to the conclusion that life in the camps might have been hard, but not necessarily deadly. Now, my question is whether it is really necessary or even desirable to have gone through a simulated experience of a Holocaust survivor in order to learn or remember the Holocaust. In fact, the idea that we can only properly understand the victim's pain if we physically and emotionally relive it, that is at the basis of the idea of VR as an empathy machine, is quite problematic in itself. And it has received ample criticism. I'm not the first one to criticize it. A scholar of emotions, Sarah Ahmed, not referring to VR, argues that empathy will always only be a wish feeling, as there will always be a gap in knowledge between my feelings and your feelings. An ethics of pain for her means that I must act about that which I cannot know, rather than act insofar as I know. Maybe the trick would therefore lie in making users aware of what they cannot know. This would mean basing the VR experiences on a different concept of empathy, one in which empathy considers the gaps of understanding between the sender and the receiver, between our insight and what from this insight we manage to transmit through words, gestures, and actions, and not in the attempt to obliterate those gaps of understanding. And maybe the reconstruction is also not the only option that should be considered when using VR for the purpose of Holocaust memory, as is done until now.
Thank you, Steffi. For our final contribution, I'd like to introduce Arne Langås, curator at the Falstad Center, and his work and research with a digital prisoner database.
For about 5 years, the Falstad Center has been running a project together with one of our colleague institutions, the Archive, Peace and Human Rights Center in Kristiansand. This project, which in Norwegian is called Norsk Digitalt Fangearkiv, Norwegian Digital Prisoner Archive, is meant to be a digital resource documenting the more than 40,000 Norwegians who were imprisoned during Second World War. The research for this project was done back in the 1990s, when the former prisoner Christian Ottosen, together with a group of others, made the book Norwegians in Captivity 1940 to 1945. 44,000 names. Every person has 3 to 6 lines, 3 columns on each page. Very little details about each person. With this project, we wanted to present the individuals in this huge system of prison camps, document them, link to primary sources, being able to tell more about what they experienced, and also link to their own testimonies. In May 2020, we launched the website fanger.no, which you see on the screen there. Here it's possible for the public to search by name of each person, or on the different camps and prisons where these people had been imprisoned. And I think the best way of presenting and talking about this project is by presenting the individuals and showing what this database can be used for. And one of those we have much information about is Frank Storm Johansen. He worked on the railroad in the northern part of Norway, was involved in a resistance group, and was arrested in September 1942. He was brought to Falstad, later on to 2 camps in Germany, before he returned home to Norway after liberation in the spring 1945. From the very limited basic information in the book, we have extended his story to a complete biography. We have his portrait on the top, his date of birth, the death date, where he lived, and his occupation, and also a short biography saying that he worked on the local railway station in Trofors, joined the local resistance in 1942, that he was arrested, but also his personal life. He and his fiancée was meant to be married in Trondheim on the 19th of September 1942. 9 days before the wedding, Frank was arrested. The wedding had to be postponed for a long time, but on 30th of June 1945, they got married in the cathedral in Trondheim. During his time in Falstad and in the camps in Germany, he sent letters and received letters to and from both his fiancée and his parents. These letters and his own written testimony we published as a book some years ago. And this is one out of many many personal testimonies giving additional information to the very basic imprisonment history. We have, in cooperation with his family, got a lot of pictures and documents, like his own list of camps in which he has been imprisoned, which is published on his profile page. His Norwegian passport, which he received in Sweden on his way home in May '45. But not just documents, also objects, like this pipe, where the various camps, the names of the various camps have been carved into the pipe. And also his journeys back to the camps. When he went back to Falkensee in 1980, Frank, together with 3 others, who was in the same camp as him. His timeline on the right, linking to the case he was arrested in, following him through the different camps and prisons, through Sachsenhausen, Falkensee, back to Sachsenhausen, before he and the other Scandinavian prisoners from the concentration camps were rescued by the Red Cross and brought to Neuengamme and later on to Denmark and Sweden. And all these places also shown in a map. Arrested on the red dot. We have the camps on the black ones. After liberation, being interned in Denmark and Sweden, the white ones, and returning back to Norway on the 26th of May on the blue dot. And everything can be documented. We have links to scanned sources, either integrated in the website or linking them to the National Archives. As part of our project, we have also got cooperation with the National Archives, with them scanning thousands and thousands of pages from index cards and prison registers from all over Norway, making us able to link to these individual documents, like Frank's card written here in Falstad in November 1942. We also use the same platform for publishing things from our own archive, like his own diary, or a diary from Falkensee with songs, and where also fellow prisoners have written their name and address, perhaps having a hope that they could keep in contact after the war. Frank Storm Johansen is one of the prisoners we have most information about. The cooperation with his family has resulted in his testimony, all the letters and pictures and objects we have received for our collections. The typical prisoner has much less information. Could, for instance, take this young girl who was 18 years old when she was imprisoned for singing the International in May 1943. We have not yet linked to any sources about her, and not added any more information than the book from the 1990s provided. But this is an ongoing work. We have several volunteers going through the scanned sources, linking them to the individual profile pages, extending the information we have about the individuals day by day. Following from the timeline, we could also go into reading about each of the prison camps. A very short, call it biography about each place, with a picture, links to external resources, and a very brief text about the history of the place, followed by a list of all those who had been imprisoned there. And also, if you know that a relative has been, for instance, in Falstad, it's possible to search by the name, and you get all those with this, for instance, his last name. And the third tab on the top is histories, which could be different actions, aktionen, resulting in people being arrested, or different groups of prisoners. For instance, the Ålesund case in 1942, where a group of Norwegians trying to flee to England with a boat were discovered and arrested. The resistance group had been infiltrated by agents who reported, and this resulted in 50 people being arrested, 20 later on being executed. The case is described, the involved people are linked, and it's also possible to link to prison camps and to sources and pictures. From the tab with the prison camps, it's also possible to see a map over all these places where primarily Norwegians had been kept prisoners during the war. All over Norway, Europe, but also Africa and the Far East. Norwegians in Japan and China being interned, Norwegian missionaries being interned in China, and also Norwegian sailors who had been captured and kept either on the ships or brought to prison camps in the countries far away from Norway. So by just taking one random here, the town of Kongsberg, most likely the local prison, these people had been kept prisoners. The project, we in a way continued this book from the with the first edition from 1995. As the title says, Norwegians in Captivity. We want to extend it to also include others, to include all the prisoners who had been in Norway during the war. This is a long time project. It would take years to even get close to completed. We have started. We have, by going through the sources relating to Falstad. And we could take a look at, for instance, those who had been in Falstad from Poland. And we don't have too much additional information about them, but we could take, there is one who came back to Falstad about 15 years ago, Mr. Orlowski, who had tried to escape to Sweden in July '44, brought to various camps in mid-Norway before he was transferred to Grini outside Oslo in the fall of 1944. He came back to Falstad in 2008. The picture up here is taken when he came here, and it's taken from a speech he had in the conference hall here for a group of students. We have an interview with him, and the plan is to include this interview as well as other testimonies in the website. So at the moment we are doing a website development, making it possible to embed videos and audios in the website. This will hopefully be finished short after summer vacation, together with an own school or student module, which will include tasks for the different subjects in both in primary school, high school, and university. As you see, there is an English flag in the top corner. That doesn't, unfortunately, not mean that the website has been translated yet. Still, it's just in Norwegian, but we do have an introduction to the website in English. Hopefully, we will be able to translate at least part of it to both English and other languages within some years. Thank you.
Thank you, Arne, and thank you to all who contributed in making this seminar possible. And thank you, the viewer. I hope you have enjoyed watching this and that some of these reflections and discussions resonate.